Uh, oh, okay, now we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to NAFSA's LGBTQ plus webinar, Queer Voices Debunking the Myth. This will be NAFSA's last webinar before our conference next month in New Orleans. So we're excited to have every one of our panelists on today, as well as a moderator. I just want to open up with some quick announcements. The ESA Awards has been I guess wrapped up. So stay tuned for our top 3 for each of the categories. And then I think Pivot, as well as NASA, has kind of formed a partnership to kind of push out a young Vietnamese American survey. If you check your emails for the latest NASA newsletter, the link will be there. Members who complete the survey will be entered to win a $100 gift card for their BSA. So please read more information on that on your newsletter. Without further ado, I'm just gonna pass it on to Pong, our presenter and facilitator for tonight's event. So Pong, if you can take it.
Thank you so much, Vu. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Queer Voices Debunking the Myth webinar. My name is Pong Wangchen, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. We're going to dive straight into it. So if I can please have everyone introduce themselves with your name, profession, and preferred gender pronoun. And why don't we start with Jiao.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jo, and I go by she, hers, and hers.
Hi everyone, my name is Ian. My profession is currently officially a desktop support specialist, and my preferred gender pronouns are he, him.
Hi everyone, my name is Tina. I am currently working as a health communications professional at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I prefer she, her, and hers.
Hi everyone, my name is Phil. I'm currently employed as an office manager for a nonprofit here in Atlanta, Georgia. My preferred pronoun is he and him.
All right, thank you, everyone. So before we get started on the questions, panel discussion, we're just going to go over some of the crash course on LGBTQ plus terminology. So without further ado, these terms should help everyone familiarize themselves with some terms that we, as LGBTQ plus members, have. So for LGBTQ, the L stands for lesbian, and that is a woman who emotionally, sexually, and is romantically attracted to other women. Gay being a man who is emotionally, sexually, and romantically attracted to other men. Bi or bisexual being a person who is attracted to 2 or more genders, though not necessarily simultaneously or in the same way or degree. Trans or transgender, a person whose gender identity is different from the cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned to at birth. So for example, male and female. And this doesn't necessarily imply orientation, as trans people can be gay, straight, bi, lesbian, etc. Queer being the umbrella term for sexual and gender minorities who are not straight or cisgender. Other terms and identities part of the LGBTQ spectrum include intersex. So that includes a person who's born with sex characteristics that don't necessarily fit the traditional definitions of male and female bodies. Previously, years ago, and it's an outdated term right now, they were referred to as hermaphrodites. Pansexual or pansexuality is to not be limited in attraction with regards to the biological sex, gender, or gender identity. Asexuals being having a lack of sexual attraction or desire for other people. Now we're going to go on to gender identity and expression. So gender is the concept of our innermost self as a male, female, a blend of both or neither. And it's how the individuals perceive themselves in what they call selves. Please know that one's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex that was assigned to at birth. The concept of fluidity is to not identify with a single fixed gender or relating to a person having or expressing a fluid or like unfixed gender identity. Sex is comprised of the characteristics and the identity that you are assigned to at birth. So male, female, intersex, etc. Next, pronouns, which we briefly introduce ourselves with. These are the words that function as nouns or refers to a person when we're speaking or in discourse, such as he, him, or himself. And the reason I ask that and why they matter is because you don't always know what exactly someone's preferred gender pronoun is by looking at them. Asking or correctly using someone's personal preferred gender pronoun is one of the most basic ways for us to show respect to their gender identity. Some other terms that may come up also include orientation, so the sexual identity in relation to the gender that they are attracted to. So for example, lesbian, gay, and bi, right? And then lastly, closet, which is an adjective or a noun for those who have not disclosed their identity or orientation. Alrighty, let's head on through the panel discussion portion. So during this part, the panelists will be taking turns giving thoughts and insights on questions that we prepared here for today. So the first question I'd like to ask everyone is, how has your LGBTQ plus identity has affected your life? And how does your LGBTQ identity tie in with your Vietnamese or Asian Pacific American Islander identity? Were there any conflicts involving the two communities? And were there any like symbiotic aspects between the two communities? So, Chow, would you like to start off first, please?
Okay. Well, I would say I identify as pansexual, and I would say it's both somewhere of a curse and a blessing. It's definitely a new way for me to express myself through one of my new identities as well, but it's also difficult, especially having to be closeted with my parents but open to the world. So I had to be very careful with who I talk to and be sure not to be outed by people.
Yeah, so I identify as a trans Asian man, Vietnamese, and I first told my parents that I was a lesbian when I was 19, and I'm 23 now, and they still are either in denial or they just, I've seen them since I've started hormone therapy. I started hormone therapy in November. So my voice has dropped, and that's really the biggest thing, and they haven't said anything about it. So I'm still not out to my parents, and as well as like extended family, and also even back at home, I have a very large Vietnamese community there in Houston, and although I don't really talk to most of them, I still keep in contact with them through Facebook, and it hasn't really tied in much to my Vietnamese identity, mostly because I keep those two as separate as possible, just because of I'm just not fully out yet to that community and my parents. So.
Thank you, Ian. Tina, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. I would say like my experience is pretty similar to Joe's. I personally identify as bisexual, so a lot of times before I was fully out, I would have to, or like even now, like I feel like I have to tiptoe at times around who I decide to disclose my identity to or not. Like for people of my generation, friends, cousins, and stuff like that, I am have talked to them about it and they know and stuff, but my extended family and stuff, they don't know. It's a thing where I haven't encountered a lot of acceptance within my own family, or at least like the older generation. So it's been a hard thing for me, and it's it's been a struggle having conversations about it. And so like for my family, a lot of times they would prefer to ignore it than actually talk about it, which is its own challenge, right? But in terms of like my community in the VSA and stuff like that. Everybody that I've told and interacted with has been very accepting and encouraging me to live my best life. And yeah.
Thank you, Tina. I've had those similar experiences myself. Thank you very much. Fook, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. So I guess for me, I think it affected. There's like two phases for how my LGBTQ plus identity affected me. So one, I actually grew up in Vietnam. So growing up, like one of my cousins is actually identify himself as a gay man as well. So growing up, I did hear a lot of stigma, and especially myths and kind of misconception from the whole family and stuff, just like how the actual like how LGBTQ like identities like actually work. Like they all think is just one aspect versus like there's a whole spectrum that you need to be encompassing for. So it's kind of similar to Ian and Tina. Like growing up, I was just kind of tiptoeing in that around that with my family, and it wasn't really until I got to about college where I got like more comfortable in terms of just laying out there. I didn't really have like a revelation moment or anything. It was just like at that point I didn't give an F about what other people think anymore, and it went from there. And I think personally, like the identity helped me a lot in terms of just making friends, just being comfortable with myself. With my personal circle of friends, like they're fine with it. I think they've been very supportive, especially there. Family-wise, the only person that really knows is my mom. My extended family doesn't really know at this point, and I don't really care whether or not they know, since my parents are the only one that really matters at that point. So it's been a somewhat mixed experience for me, since we still don't really talk about it in the house, because they choose, like Tina said, they choose to ignore versus discussing anything that they don't, because they don't really want to learn more about the actual facts.
Thank you, Fuck. I actually wanted to know what your experiences were like in, like specifically where you are in the country, in like to your surroundings, like your cities or your towns, and how that may or may not have affected you. Look, you brought up your college was accepting and your college community was accepting, right?
Yeah, so my university, like compared to all of the other university around the Atlanta, Georgia area, we're like the most, I would consider like the most liberal, the most like democratic, and the most like pretty much, you think about anything in sorts of the left wing, it's pretty much my university, and we promote like diversity, we promote acceptance and all that kind of terms. Like you kind of have to tiptoe around everybody in the university if you're on the pretty much the right wing conservative side on that part. So that on its own is like was a positive experience. The city of Atlanta, I believe, has one of the largest gay population. I'm not too sure in terms of what the ranking is in around the city, but it is, even though like it's Georgia is technically in the south, Atlanta is like a very progressive and like pretty much they consider it as like a northern kind of city. So we have a lot of like positive reinforcement here. You don't want to be there. It's not what you would typically think of what the south kind of environment is like.
Gotcha. And when it comes to like depictions of like where, like the city and stuff. So I'm, home grown here in New York City, super liberal bubble. Some even call it a birthplace of like gay civil rights, etc. I experienced like a certain level of like comfortableness. But a lot of times like others don't. I was actually wondering if Ian, you can talk about what Houston was like growing up, as like a city, as a town, as a community.
Yeah, so Houston is a very large city. I think in terms of the Vietnamese population, like I don't know the exact number, but I know that it's at least 1 million people, I'm pretty sure. It's probably more than that. I think it's at least a million Vietnamese people that live there now. And so I grew up with a very large Vietnamese community. When I was in high school, I went to Catholic school on the weekends, and I was always like very open about who I was when I still identified as a female, and I identified as bisexual back then. And everyone was pretty accepting of it, especially since we were all teenagers in a Catholic community every weekend. For that part, most of the people that I was with were very accepting, and I never really hid who I was. When I did identify as a female, I had long hair, but I always wore boy clothes, and I always wore my hair in a ponytail. So I was always very tomboyish. That's what they would describe me as. And I never really backed down from that, that identity of mine back in high school and back where I'm from. And, it was really empowering to be in that environment because I never felt like I was being bullied for who I was or anything like that. It also helped that there was also a few other queer kids in that community as well that were very openly gay and very, never really stepped down from who they were. So that really did help a lot. It was always, I think, just the older people and our parents that we were always just kind of worried about how they would think about us and stuff like that. So.
Thank you, Ian. Tina, I was wondering what your environment was like when you were younger also.
Yeah, so I grew up in Boulder, which is about like half an hour northwest of Denver. Boulder is known as like the liberal bubble of Colorado. So going to CU, it's like it prides itself on being a very liberal and progressive community and campus. Like the people refer to Boulder as like the hippie town and stuff like that. So the community that I grew up around was very open-minded for the most part, and always willing to talk about things and never really judged people on how they express themselves or at least from my experience. Like I went to Fairview, which was one of the more affluent high schools in Boulder, or like there's only 2 high schools, but it was the one that was known for being like rich white people. But everybody that I hung out with, although granted I hung out with like the choir and theater kids, which tends to attract more people like queer kids anyways, but they were very accepting of everything. I wasn't out in high school, but like I had always known, and it was a really a positive experience for me for the most part.
Oh, great. So actually, I wanted to get to another question. I was asking about the environment because I wanted to know if, has anyone witnessed specific acts or any type of discrimination or prejudice based on your own LGBTQ identity or your peers or other family members, for example?
I'll go.
Sure thing, Ian.
Yeah, so we go to the University of Denver, which is a small private school in Denver. It's not one of the bigger schools. I think there's about 6,000 undergrad. So I've only really been out for about a year or so, a little bit over a year as trans. And when I did identify as a female and still gay, it was going to the bathroom was always really complicated because I cut all my hair off the summer after my freshman year of college. So when I was 19, I had short hair and still dressed very much like a boy, and wanted to be perceived that way, but was still not really sure what that meant for me and who I was. And the amount of times that I would get harassed in the bathrooms was pretty crazy. I just never felt safe there. And that was one of probably the bigger times that I just felt really discriminated against. Also, every time I go to the airport, I get felt down by TSA because I wear a binder, and those machines that you go through are gendered. So the TSA people will look at you and then choose male or female when you go into the thing that scans your body, and then since I wear a binder, it shows up that I'm wearing something on my chest. And so I always have to get felt down by a dude to make sure that I don't have anything in my chest area. So yeah, and that is constantly every time I go to the airport. So that's really just one of the bigger things. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing again. I'm really sorry to hear that.
It's okay.
I'm going next. So I guess for our homosexual man, I think I like at least growing up, especially within Vietnam itself or within the Vietnamese community, there's a huge misconception that like if you're homosexual, either male or female, like you are automatically they assume you're transgender, or at least like you want to be like the opposite like gender or whatever it is, and then like you aspire to be that kind of deal versus you're just attracted to the same sex. That was one of the biggest problem in terms of what I saw within my own family with my cousin kind of deal, whereas just like they just want the whole time they just explain for him to be like, oh, you want to be a girl, like you want to dress up like kind of this, or you want to go out of your way and like be this like gender, even though like he himself like still identify as with the gender pronoun like he, him, and his in terms of that. Within our own peer, at least around the college, like high school level, I think the biggest one I've ran into is when I tell people about my identity, especially guys. It's like the first thing they come up with and tell me is like, oh, I'm cool with that and all, but I don't want you to be attracted to me. And in terms of that, I just give the response. It's just like, we have standards too. It's the fact that like we're attracted to the same sex does not mean we're automatically attracted to everybody out there in the world that's of that sex. So I think that's like a predominant like issue that I foresee like every time.
One thing for me that comes up in terms of like discrimination, especially, I feel like there's this perception that bi people are greedy or promiscuous. So like there was a while I was trying like online dating, and like people would message me asking to if I wanted to be part of a threesome or like stuff like that, and it's just like such a turn off for one, like for me personally. Not to say like that's, but yeah. So like that's challenging to like get over that, or try to help people get over that perception of what like bi people, even though like bi people make up like a good portion of the LGBT community, like they are marginalized and stuff. We are marginalized. So I think that's been my biggest struggle, especially as someone who is cisgendered. A lot of times people won't make any assumptions on my sexuality because of that. But that's been an area where I've run into some struggle. CU itself at my college is done really well with trying to be more progressive. Like some of our newer buildings have all gender neutral restrooms and stuff, which is really awesome. Like I use those all the time, and they're pretty clean and stuff too, so it's nice.
For me personally, mine are probably just little instances of like microaggressions. I would say similar to Tina, things like that, situations like that, but also being like having my sexuality as a fetish for people, especially men, like, oh, have you ever been with a girl before? Or, oh, that's kind of hot, it's little things like that kind of irks you as you kind of go along through your life.
Thank you all. So now we're going to move on to our next question. So was there a defining moment throughout your lives that enabled you to advocate for our community? And as a leader within the community, has your identity played a role in your leadership development or community involvement? For some of you, you can even try to consider your career paths, if that would be more easily relatable.
I'll start. I wouldn't. It's probably the moment where I really kind of came out on Facebook. And I know a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but it was when I was watching Orange is the New Black and Ruby Rose came on and I was like, God damn, she's beautiful. But from that moment on, I kind of like, really solidified like my attraction to women. And from that moment on, like I was the president of my Asian Student Alliance, and I really try to incorporate like workshops on Asian American and Pacific Islanders being queer in our own community and things like that. Nothing too big yet, but we're hoping to make our way through there.
I have not seen Orange is the New Black, but I am 100% like on board with you with that one. For me, it was a little bit, for some reason, like when I was involved with BSA and stuff, it was always very, like, I would kind of separate those identities for myself. Looking back on it, I don't know why. One way that I would express my LGBT identity was through my work. I worked as a peer educator at our public health department, so we talked a lot about like sexual health and
Hello, Tina, are you there?
Uh-oh.
Okay, so sexual health.
Oh, I think Tina froze.
Okay, let's wait a few seconds and try to troubleshoot. In case she'll come back right now.
I guess while we wait for her, like I can go and share my story. Sorry, it's just a little funny to see her frozen face on the screen. So excuse me while I'm like holding my laughter while I'm saying this. I don't know whether or not there was really a defining moment that enabled me to I guess to advocate for the LGBTQ community. I think since college, at least since I got more comfortable with my identity, I've just sort of been doing it. Especially within the VSA community, I have a somewhat headstrong personality, so I hear something that's not, or at least I hear someone say something that's not really within like the realm factor or something that's like a misconception. I take the steps, just take the right steps just to fix them right away, or at least like tell them at least like this is the actual facts, or these are kind of things that you should be like involved in kind of deal. But yeah, I think it's at least it helps me in terms of just being comfortable and then just highlighting the fact that you can be comfortable around with your identity around the community. Because I don't know. There.
I think for me it had to be the first time that when I was in the women's bathroom that I had a woman just kind of like pause and like look at me and then just be like, just not say a word. And so for me that it was that awkwardness that I had with this woman of like not knowing what to do as I was washing my hands that made me realize like people like that the minute someone doesn't look like you or doesn't belong, like they instantly just kind of freeze and they don't know how to react to you. And in that moment I felt truly like I felt like I felt so weird and inside, and I just felt like I didn't like that feeling of like being judged instantly, and just having this person completely like, not react, and it made me feel super uncomfortable. And so that moment for me, I think was the very first time that I admitted to myself that I'm trans. I think that was like kind of the first time that I like kind of realized that. I was like in denial about it for a long time, and that for me has made me more involved in the queer community on DU's campus, as well as in Denver's queer community as well. And so For me personally, I want to be like the first Asian trans man politician, and that's kind of, and advocating for LGBT rights and stuff like that, because we still have a long ways to go, and there's still a lot of discrimination in terms of policy, and that's really what I'm interested in. So.
Oh, thank you, Ian. I was wondering if you can actually delve a little bit into your time during college and what your involvement was with the LGBTQ organizations in Denver.
So within my campus, DU's campus itself, when I was a freshman, I started becoming involved with the Queer Straight Alliance on campus. And then by the time I was a sophomore, I was one of the co-presidents for the club. And throughout that year, we had different events to host more awareness about the LGBT community, and just events that we can go to, and problems within the LGBT community, and kind of that intersectionality between, people of color and the LGBT community and stuff like that. And we hosted a drag show at the end of the year.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah, so that was when I was a freshman, we had our first drag show, and then it started from there. And then in terms of like the Denver politics community, I interned for an openly gay House rep in Denver during the legislative session a couple years ago. And so I was very open about who I was then, and the rep that I worked for, the representative I worked for, was one of the first openly gay reps. So that was really cool. And one of the bills that he's been trying to get passed is to ban conversion therapy for minors. So pretty much parents in Colorado, if their child comes out to them as gay, their parents can still make them go to conversion therapy and go through that whole process. So I worked on that bill when I was an intern. It hasn't gotten passed. It's never passed the Senate here in Colorado. So that's just a couple of things that I'm doing, just trying to get involved in the Denver community. So.
Thank you, Ian. I was wondering if you could actually just help explain to the audience what conversion therapy is, or what some would call "quote unquote" conversion therapy.
Yeah, so it's conversion therapy. Is the idea that you can choose to be gay, and so so conversion therapy is when a therapist pretty much is trying to convince you that you're not gay, and or a member of the LGBT community, and kind of you talk to this person and they pretty much tell you like, oh no, it's just a phase you're going through, let's try these things, and there's a lot of different there's a lot of different organizations that do it differently. Some of them are camps that parents send their children to, where they pretty much have things done to them that I can't say out loud.
Yeah, I've seen some depictions of that on cartoon shows like Family Guy or South Park.
Yeah, and so it's it's still happening out there in a lot of states, and it's still legal for back in the day. I think it's banned now. I can't say for sure, but they used to do electroshock therapy to gay men and stuff like that. So that's just one of them, kind of what conversion therapy is, but it's not a real thing that happens, and you can't just people don't just choose to be a part of this community, and I think we all know that, obviously, but yeah, so that's something, and so that's what conversion therapy is.
I would like to leave a comment on that. Similar to, I guess, conversion therapy, there's a lot of misconception and the stereotype in Asia, especially, that being gay or being within identifying as LGBT in Asia is a sickness, versus being conversion therapy. They try to fix you through getting medicine, or try to get sending you to hospital, or they just try to pray the gay away into that kind of terminology. So it's more predominant now. At least I think it's still over there versus within the Western Hemisphere. In terms of that, so yeah. at least within the Vietnamese community, I know there's some people who still think it's completely like a disease kind of deal where you have to cure it before like it makes your child just like go completely awry, which is not true at all.
Thanks, y'all, and welcome back, Tina. Tina, are you good to go?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to reiterate the question again. So was there a defining moment that enabled you to advocate for LGBTQ community? And as a leader within your own community, has your identity played a role in your leadership development and or community involvement?
I was talking before and then I cut off, right?
Yes.
Can you remind me where I cut off?
Sexual health. That's the last two words I heard.
Okay, yeah. So for me, working as a peer educator and talking to students and the volunteers that we worked with around sexual health and social justice issues and just general like health equity, that was where, when I started working in that job and I got like a safe zone training from our gender and sexuality center, I think for me that's where I was able to be a leader in a way that I wasn't able to in my involvement with VSA. So just helping our volunteers learn more about the health, mental and physical health issues that the queer community might, how they experience it in different ways than what you would generally perceive as issues are, and kind of helping them understand more and think critically about the way that they communicate about some of those things, and meeting the needs of the community that we're teaching these health topics to, rather than just like a big broad umbrella of like, this is how you should be having sex or how to have safe sex and stuff like that, because everybody's like experiences are different.
Great, thank you, Tina. So next up, I'd like to ask, are there any challenges within the LGBTQ community? You know, for example, stuff like masculine and feminine culture, racism, body image, the exclusion of bi, trans, and other queer folks. And have you experienced these issues personally? And this also includes non-visible issues that, say, cisgender straight people may not know about. And I know that we brought some of them up earlier, specifically in regards to the bathroom and challenges at the airport. So, Chow, would you like to start off, please?
Yeah, definitely some of the things that happen for me, or probably even Tina, is erasure of our sexuality, you know, like even within our own community, our own queer community, like, oh, you know, you're just kind of drawing attention, like bisexual people don't really exist. It's all about gays and lesbians and whatnot. But I also want to bring a point to the fact that even as a queer person, some of the things that I have done is kind of brought up body dysmorphia when it comes to a trans person. Like, I kind of forget that that's something that they go through and have to deal with and stuff like that. So it's like on both ends of the spectrum. Like, as a queer person, these have happened to me, but also I have done this within my own queer community.
Oh, Chow, can you explain for the audience what body dysmorphia may be?
I think it's better if Ian explains it.
I think the term is so I think there's like this conception that like trans people they feel like they were born into the wrong body per se, or that, you know, I'm a boy but I was born a girl, and that I think that's like one of the biggest myths about trans people, is because that could not necessarily be true. There are trans people in the world who identify, body dysmorphia, the way that I describe it for myself, because I experience it, is just having a part of my body that I don't like, that I just feel so uncomfortable to have on myself. It's hard for me to look at myself sometimes, and it's hard for me to feel good about myself because of, you know, the way that I feel about my body. It just doesn't make me comfortable. And so that's how I would describe body dysmorphia, is how I look at myself and how I feel about myself. I just don't like it. It doesn't feel right to me. Like it feels wrong, and it just doesn't feel like I should be having these things on my body, is how I would describe it. So.
Oh, thank you too. Ian, I was wondering if we can delve more into any specific challenges, again, that you as a trans person of color may face.
Yeah, so I think my biggest challenge as a person that identifies as a person of color, as an Asian male, just the emasculation of Asian men, and that's never fun, and something that I've experienced a lot, and it's also really interesting, just being trans, like in the Asian community. The only reason why I think, or one of the biggest reasons why I'm not out fully to my parents, is because there's a huge language barrier between us, and I wouldn't even really know how to begin the conversation of what it means to be trans, especially when I don't know the language behind it, and I don't think I don't think that, you know, we really have all of the resources as an Asian community, you know, for the LGBT community. I know there's a lot of resources out there, but it just doesn't feel like we know about them that well. And so that's one of my biggest challenges, is having this discussion with my parents, who have this huge language barrier that they and I have. So.
Thank you, Ian. Fook, I was wondering what your thoughts were on the challenges that we may face.
I think one of the few that are there, one of the things that I've seen is at least with those who are struggling to come out, or at least are struggling to figure out what they kind of are, there is a stigma within them that if they hang out with other folks of the LGBTQ community, especially within Asian American community, if they hang out with like those kind of deal, it seems like a negative kind of a negative connotation into hang out with that kind of group versus there, and they kind of like steer away from the community itself just because like they don't want to get involved in that whole aspect, or at least they want to hide themselves within that kind of like whole community because they're not comfortable to get out, and they don't really necessarily get the kind of support. So we do have a lot of questions where people always ask is it's like, why don't I guess LGBT folks come out and just like straight up identify? Like, I'm pretty sure like the community would kind of like accept that kind of fact. But as you can see, is if you look at a bullying kind of situation in high school, like the kids are kind of singled out because they're different, and to have to deal with that kind of pressure on like a national or like an international level, where like the whole entire international community don't really have a positive view on who you really are, and don't really have all the facts and all of the information that who you really are. So that deters a lot of people like from these coming out, or at least like trying to get the support that they need to be, or at least develop into like to know who they are. If that makes any sense.
Like being visible, right? Fuck.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I see that struggle a lot too. Sometimes I kind of wish like someone would just be like, "Hey there, I'm blank," and you know, it makes me feel more comfortable. And as a little kid, I kind of wish like there were more people that were out. Tina?
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely, like when I was growing up, I remember a conversation that I had with my cousin where she was talking about her, like a friend of hers who told her they were bi, and she was kind of saying like, I don't think that bi people really exist. Like they just haven't fully decided that they're gay or lesbian, or they're just experimenting. And I think that for me was like a big, she was someone that I really looked up to. I mean, it's like still a role model for me, but like at the time she was like the person, like my superhero, you know, and she said that and I just like froze, because if someone for me who I looked up to so much said those things and then like what would it mean if I do come out like that? And it kind of touched on it earlier when I talked about like people, like the bi erasure aspect of it. Like it's scary for me, and that's why for the longest time I didn't come out.
Tina?
Yeah.
So I began to hear a lot of like bi erasure like statements like that, like, oh, you're just confused, etc. Back when I was in middle school, so that was about like 12 years ago. Can I ask like when you started hearing like statements like that?
I think probably high school. I did probably earlier, but I didn't pay attention, or like I just wasn't as aware of it. But and like just I remember in high school we were talking about like a mutual friend, a friend and I were, and they thought that they just weren't all the way out of the closet yet. That's what I mean. When I said earlier that they did, she said that they didn't fully yet. But yeah, I think high school for me.
All right, thank you, y'all. So now we're gonna dive into some audience questions. We have quite a few. So we can go this one by one. So we'll start with the first one. For the majority of the general population, I think most people are familiar with the LGB of LGBTQ. So that's lesbian, gay, bis. What are some ways those who identify as LGB allies can be of the TQ? Did I read that right?
So I'll go as the T and the Q. I think that one of the biggest ways, one of the things that I struggled with the most when I first came out was my pronouns. I definitely think that what we could, like, I think if you are an ally and you identify as an ally and you want to be an ally, for a person that's trans that asks you to, or I guess how LGBT people can be allies to the T and Q is just understand that, you know, if like, for example, like for pronouns, like if you are in a conversation with a lot of people and your friend who's trans isn't there and you're talking about them, and they start using the wrong pronoun, don't be afraid to just be like, hey, that's not the pronoun that they use. They use this one. You know, and something that, you know, when I had friends who came out to me as trans, you know, I myself, I struggled with it, you know, and it's understandable, it's a change, but, you know, the more that you do it, the easier it gets. And I think like with LGBT people and, you know, wanting to support their trans and queer allies, you know, it's kind of, it always helps to have people on your side who can, you know, stick up for you when you're not around, because I think that's something that happens a lot is people talk, and, you know, being trans visibly is still, I think, a really big risk for you because you don't know what's going to happen. And you know, I feel like our society, like in general, is still very put off by trans people, and they don't know really how to interact with them. And, you know, so I think having, you know, your allies, your LGBT allies, you know, just being able to stick up for you when you're not there is really great, because it's not, it matters a little more. And I think being able to call people out on, you know, their transphobic ways, I think you as a person doing that, it really kind of straightens that idea that trans people are just, you know, just people, you know, and changing their pronouns isn't that hard. Like, that's one of my biggest things, was something that I really struggle with. So.
Well, thank you, Ian. So at the recent New York City, oh, sorry. So in the recent New York City Pride Parade, there was more. I noticed more of an inclusion compared to previous years of like marchers with the trans flag. I saw that there was a big push for that. So I'm actually glad that, you know, as recently there's been a bit more vocal support. Personally, I've seen like over the past few years, a lot of that focuses on like gay marriage, so specifically towards like gays and lesbians, rather than, you know, the other, like everyone in our community, right?
Right.
So would anyone else like to answer the? Oh, sorry. So we're gonna move on to our next question. So over the years, those small things that really grind my gears, how did you respond to those changes over the years? So the examples we have here are, oh, so you're bi, have you been with a girl?
For me personally, I don't even know. I mean, this has been recent for me, and it actually came from one of my coworkers, my boss actually. So, you know, I try to joke it off, you know, the environment isn't like that serious in a sense, but I would like to know myself. Like, I wouldn't know how to kind of say, oh, you know, because then I would have to go to a long spiel about like why this is wrong. So you tell me, like, what's a short way of like telling people off?
I think I can comment on that. So I think I have the personality to always tell people off whenever I have the chance, or at least like when it comes to at least an LGBT issues, like I just come up and shoot a cannon, and as soon as something, I just shoot them off right away, just so to nip it in the bud. Obviously that's not an effective method for all across the board, but I think that's just what works for my personality. But I don't think there's really a short method to deal with some of those kind of questions, just because sometimes they ask because they really don't know, and they do appreciate the explanation sometimes in terms of like what are kind of misconception they need to learn a little bit more. So especially with like the bi kind of deal, it's like, oh, you've been with a girl, and it's like you can go off into that kind of explanation. And with the gay side, there's always like at least with the gay side, people always ask us like, oh, how do you really know you're gay? Like, have you ever been with a girl yourself? Like, do you know that part? And it's like, I think it's just like give them like an explanation that really make them really understand is there. The approach really depends on who you're talking to.
I agree with Flip there. I think like in a situation where it's like with my situation earlier when I said, look, online dating, people would say it like that type of crap. Like, I usually just choose not to engage in that and just like roll my eyes and call it like, you're not going to be able to create any sort of behavior change by engaging with like, right? But it also depends like on the conversation. If it's with a friend who sincerely wants to know about these things, then you can sit down and talk to them and have a frank conversation with them. But then if it's a situation where there is a power dynamic where it might be a little bit risky to actually call out that person, then that's up to like your own. Like for me, that's in that type of dynamic. If it's like a person of power who is like making one of those comments towards me, so I usually just decompress in some way or another.
You know, I think you brought up a point that I've personally experienced sometimes. So can you just delve into like what do you mean by person of power? Like, do you mean like a coworker or like a boss or like a friend you haven't seen in a while?
Yeah, like I guess for me, I interpret that as like someone in a situation who the dynamic is they're a professor or like a TA or like a supervisor or boss or something like that, where it's not just like a friendship type relationship. That's how I interpret it. It could be different for other people though.
All right, thank you. So we're gonna move on to our next question. So let's see what it says here. In what ways do you feel that the general UNAPSA community or Asian Pacific American Islander community organizations can be more supportive or inclusive? What can be realistically implemented within the next month, quarter, year via YouTube?
I think doing things like this is a good first step. Like I personally have not seen that much stuff like this done before. So like just having this type of conversation and like having real people share our experiences and what it's been like as a queer person of color, that can help educate our community a little bit more and kind of put a face and humanize what our experiences are and how different they can be. Are my initial thoughts on it.
I think I agree with Tina on that part. Is like it's nice to have this conversation to be on the public and available for like the members to access, kind of understand a little bit more about what the community is all about. A lot of the, or at least a lot of the struggle within, from what I see with the personal circle friends, like they don't really know how to be more supportive, or they really know how to help, because they lack that kind of general knowledge in terms of what exactly are the struggles or what exactly like we're going through, versus just like what's available in the media. And sometimes people just don't do the research, or they don't really like make their way out of there until like it's perfectly accessible in front of them. So having these kind of conversations definitely help, especially from our perspective. And I think just having more just like Q&A kind of session for them to kind of like have that kind of background, just ask us whatever they need to know, and we can provide more perspective, or just from what our experience, that would be like a lot more helpful for them to know, and then we can go on. We can develop the supportive things from there.
Yeah, I definitely think that events like this are really cool. Something that I definitely think we need is just a lot more community. I think a lot more education, I think, is the most important thing. I think that it's easy to have friends who identify as a part of the LGBT community, who also identify as like API, but I also feel like there's not really a big like community like of API folks who identify as part of the LGBT community. So I think maybe that doesn't really help a lot in like in terms of like exposure and education, because I think like something that we all struggle with is like wanting to see someone who looks like us like on TV or somewhere, representation. And so I think maybe just a lot more education, and maybe like a way for people to really connect and get to know each other, and some kind of change on that. So
I don't have much to add, honestly, but possibly having more queer people, queer Vietnamese American, be in leadership roles, within even NASA and everything like that, to kind of have more of your target audience that's coming into this organization really be exposed to the people, and to show them that they have a actual community within your own group.
Oh, thank you, Chow. Yeah, as a gay Asian American myself and the president of my own regional organization, I definitely agree with you on that. So our final audience question for this portion is, for many who are not of the LGBTQ+ spectrum, they are not able to see the racism that is deeply rooted within the community. Have you experienced any racism from your LGBTQ+ peers? What are some ways that we can work to be a more truly inclusive community?
Can I actually add that
Yes.
people, even within the queer LGBTQT community, are actually still deeply rooted within their own racism? So just kind of change it up, because it's both of us, really. But I would say, yeah, definitely. I mean, for gay men, you see the no fats, no femmes, no Asians on dating apps and everything like that. Or just like the idea of pride itself, with the recent changing of the flags, like many of our own community fail to recognize that pride itself was created by Black and brown queer women, trans women, actually.
Yes.
So definitely something that we really have to work on.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So yeah, I don't really have much to say other than what Joe has already said, but I definitely think that like within our own like API community, like there's a lot of racism in there, anti-Blackness and stuff like that. So I think it's mostly in terms of like how can we like be more inclusive. I don't really know how to answer that question. I think that itself is like a issue that DU is struggling with, and something that I'm a part of, like that struggle in like trying to figure out what it means to be more inclusive, and how to kind of fight these battles that, you know, within the campus and within our own community. It's something that I struggle with personally, and something in terms of how do I battle that. So it's a hard question for me to answer.
I guess I'll just echo Ian's stuff for a little bit. I don't really know how to answer it in the same way. Y'all already covered the main point in terms of what gay man discrimination usually are in these kind of treaty application. And so sometimes I just really talk to those people who express those discrimination just for funs and shits and giggles. And you see a lot of Tumblr accounts who post like screenshots from Grindr, where it's like having the accounts just so people can attack them on another site. But that's a whole other complete question. But in terms of that, I think it's everybody have preferences. I think when you talk about racism within the LGBTQ community, it's a lot of like dating related kind of thing. Everybody have preferences kind of deal. But when it comes to just like excluding entire race or excluding these kind of factors just because you don't really like them in that kind of way, it's something that we all have to work on to become better. and that sort of sense, that's really there.
I'm gonna just go off of here. I feel like LGBT activism, kind of like feminism, was kind of rooted in white feminism and like white LGBT. Like those are the issues that matter to community. Like there tends to be a blind spot for the issues that impact queer people of color, whether that's health issues, physical and mental health issues, socioeconomic disparities, stuff like that. There's a lens that people generally see LGBT activism through, and that lens usually does not include people of color. So that, I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that point, but it's a thing, and I think when people acknowledge it, and just putting a black and brown stripes onto the flag isn't going to erase the queer people of color are marginalized and discriminated against by the broader queer community. So yeah, and thinking about like little things, like baby steps that can be done to make things more inclusive, just the language that we use in our day-to-day interactions with people, even like newsletters or like stuff like that, using more gender neutral terms like they instead of like the he/she and stuff like that, or asking people what their preferred gender pronouns are. And I think just the little things can make a big difference in the long run, as long as like once they are normalized more, and then it won't be as big of a deal anymore if someone introduces themselves along with their pronouns.
Yeah, I think within the line of what Gail said earlier, with a lot of like people like queer color like stepping up to leadership roles, so people can at least see themselves on like another screen or like another factor, that would really help. I personally have seen a lot of friends who are who are activists within the LGBT community, and they're queer and they're of color, and they kind of really don't want to associate themselves with like the group just because like they think it's not really something that's, or they say they don't see any advantages, and they think it's something that's not going to help them in the long run, and they pretty much do not like to associate themselves with that kind of, or at least even within their own like color culture. So I don't really know how to withdraw on that, but I think it's just seeing like with more leaders stepping up to address these issues, it would help a lot more too.
So do any of you have any closing thoughts on what you would like our audience to be cognizant of and realize, and to leave this webinar with?
I'll start. Well, I just want to say thank you, for giving us the space and for taking initiative to, even if you're just watching as an ally, like to really put yourself in our position and kind of see what we go through, as well as just kind of recognize that, you know, we're still figuring it out. Like we don't have all the answers. We probably have more questions than answers, really. But don't be afraid, you know, just learn. Learn with us.
For me, I would definitely say that, like, as a trans person who's like kind of going through this journey of my physical transformation and coming out of the closet, like constantly, it's okay to ask your trans friend like questions. It's okay to ask them questions that aren't offensive. Like, it's okay to ask them questions about what they're going through, because I personally think that the more education is better. I mean, obviously, like, talk to your friend and be like, listen, I like fully support you, and like I have questions about, like, you know, how are you, like how are you going through this, like what's it like and stuff like that. You know, don't be afraid to like educate yourself. And yes, you have Google, but you also do have like your friends that can do the same. So
Thank you. Fuck, do you have any closing thoughts you would like the audience to know?
Yeah, I think Yao and Ian cover the basics. I'll talk about, like, I like with being an ally. You guys want to be more of an ally to the LGBT community. Is like I think the biggest important thing is just listen and just be supportive, and like don't worry too much about like the much of details. You can obviously always ask questions. Don't make any assumptions. Ask questions as if you don't know. Like don't ask and say like, oh, you never been with a girl, kind of deal, because that never goes well in that kind of area. So with these kind of deal, I think it's just being there for a person who's still kind of struggling with their identity, or who just came out with a kind of deal. Like, it gives them comfort to know that someone's there to support them, because you never know what they might be going through on their personal side, on the other side of the spectrum.
Thank you, Fuck. And Tina?
Kind of just going off everything that everybody said, just being here and being on this webinar and listening and asking questions, I think that's like, keep doing that, but at the same time, like, also listen. You know, don't listen to respond, listen to understand and see us as people. You know, that's really all that anybody's asking for. Just keep doing things with the best intentions and being there for your friends.
Thank you, Tina. So before I pass off to Vu, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for our first Queer Voices Debunking the Myth webinar. So Vu?
Yeah, so just to kind of like piggyback off of Paul's message, I would like to thank every single one of you for, you know, setting this time aside this evening to kind of share your stories. It just like reaffirms my passion to bringing topics like LGBT awareness and advocacy to the NAFSA community. And when you think of Pride, like in order to have Pride, I think that you should understand struggle and kind of go through the struggle. And each individual on this webinar has gone through an instance where, you know, gone through something that they had to overcome fear. So they were incredibly brave to you know, sit on this webinar with each and every one of you sitting at home sharing your stories. So, you know, thank you, Zhao, Ian, Will, Tina, even Pong, for putting this together. But yeah, hopefully we can actually continue this into multiple installments. For those of you sitting at home, obviously, if we had like 20 speakers and 5 hours of webinar time, we wouldn't even have, you know, be able to scratch the surface of it all. So, you know, I hope that in the future installments of these LGBT webinars, we'll be able to cover additional topics, and, you know, stuff from like political action to language barriers and even sexual health or relationship, you know, the juicier topics. So thank you guys again. Yeah, this is our final webinar before conference. So we'll be signing off. Thank you. Thank you again for those of you sitting at home showing us the support. We'll be continuing the discussion on our Facebook event. So if we haven't addressed your question on YouTube Live, we'll be migrating all the questions over to the the Facebook event. So we'll see you there. But yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.